We're in Nehemiah. We started last week in Nehemiah. Who was here for that last week? Kicking off with Nehemiah. So Nehemiah happens over here, right near the end of the Old Testament. So just to do a quick recap to remind ourselves of where we're at. This is the point in the Bible where God has brought his people out of the slavery in Egypt. He then established them as that nation. You've got all this stuff here with the kings where they're an established nation living under God's covenant, except they didn't manage to keep the covenant with God. And so they ended up in exile in Babylon, which is here, because Babylon is north. That's why it's upwards, see? Clever that, isn't it? And so they've been in exile. God told his people that they would be in exile for 40 years. And after they'd been in exile for 40 years, Babylon was overthrown by Persia, and the king of Persia said all of the exiles could return. And so where we are in Nehemiah, it's this bit here where gradually the exiles are returning from Jerusalem, returning from Persia, and they are rebuilding Jerusalem. And there's some key people in this stage. So if you trace through the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which incidentally, Ezra and Nehemiah were originally one book. We've just split them in our Bibles into two. So in Ezra, it tells the first bit of how this guy called Zerubbabel came, and he oversaw the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. That was their starting point, the temple where they met with God. So Zerubbabel oversees rebuilding the temple. Then a little bit later, Ezra comes along, and he's the one who deals with getting them back in line with God's covenant. He deals with the law. He's like, okay, if we're reestablishing as a nation under God, we need to live God's way. And he works through some of the rather sticky situations around coming back in line with God's way. And so Nehemiah comes in after all of that has happened. And Nehemiah, as we heard last week, is still up in Persia. He's cupbearer to the king. Quite an important position. And he hears from people that, yeah, they've rebuilt the temple. Yeah, Ezra's been dealing with the law. But the walls of Jerusalem are just rubble. And in those times, a city wall mattered. The city wall was your protection. It was what established you as a place. If you didn't have a city wall, you didn't really count. Without a city wall, you were vulnerable to other people just coming and taking over. And so Nehemiah, as we heard last week, is absolutely distraught by this. And I want us just to recap that bit from last week, because so often when we think about the story of Nehemiah, we jump straight to, and yeah, they all got together and built the walls. But there's stuff that happened before. There was a critical foundation, if you like, to that journey of rebuilding the wall, which we read about last week in chapter 1. And if you remember, we thought about how his first reaction, he wept and mourned because this mattered. But then his response, before he went down there, before he started this wall-building project, he fasted and prayed. That matters. And all the way through this series, as we look at everything that happens all the way along, I want us to hold on to that thought. Before everything else, he prayed. He prayed. And the way that he prayed, we looked last week, he remembered who God is, how great and awesome God is. He repented. He recognized, you know what, actually, yeah, the reason we're in this pickle is because we messed up. He owned that. He recalled God's promises to them. That God had promised, if they turned back to God, if they followed his rules again, if they lived his way, that he would rebuild them as a people. And then he made a request to God, give me favor. And having built that foundation, he approaches the king of Persia. The king of Persia asks him, why are you looking a bit down in the dumps? And he tells him, and he asks the king of Persia, as his cupbearer, could I have some time off so I can go and see what's going on and sort this out? And while we're at it, because, it's a bit of a risky journey, could I have some letters to all the various governors along the route to say, don't attack me, I've got the king's authority to do this? Oh, and while you're at it, king, could you also provide the funding for the building project? He was bold. And the king of Persia says yes. That's the foundation of where we're coming to today. That foundation of prayer that leads to that boldness so that he comes into this project. And so we come to chapter 2. So we're going to be reading today from Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 9 to 20. If anyone can find it in the church Bibles and shout out a page number, that would 485. Wow, you are on the ball, Kathleen. I am impressed. 485. And John is going to come and read to us from Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 9 to 20.
So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about this, they were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except for the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the Jackal Well and Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, "Let us start rebuilding." So they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. "What is this you are doing?" they asked. "Are you rebelling against the king?" I answered them by saying, "The God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it."
Awesome. Thank you, John. So, coming into this passage that we've read, you'll notice these guys, Sanballat and Tobiah, okay? We're going to deal with them at the end. So put them to one side for the moment, because I want us to start by focusing on that middle section where he comes to Jerusalem. And so he's come to Jerusalem, and I think it said he was there for 3 days. Yeah, after staying there for 3 days. So I imagine he's been kind of hanging out. You know, there's people who'd probably seen years ago. He was probably sort of catching up, working out who's who. You know when you come to a new place and you're figuring out, okay, who are the different people? What are different people's roles in the group? What's the general feel here? Where's everybody at? He's kind of getting a feel for 3 days. And then he goes on this secret nighttime inspection. So if we look at a map, Lydia, can I borrow your stick for pointing? Because I couldn't find my laser pointer, and I didn't know if my laser pointer would work on there anyway, so thank you. So here we have the picture of Jerusalem at the time. So if we trace round where he goes, it says he went out of the valley gate. That's there. So I imagine those first 3 days he was probably hanging out up here. This is where most of the stuff went on with the temple. So he goes out of the valley gate there. Then it says he went towards the jackal well and the dung gate. The dung gate is down here. Not clear where the jackal well is, but presumably it's somewhere in between. So he comes down to the dung gate. Then he moved on towards the fountain gate and the king's pool. Here's the fountain gate. We think the king's garden was there, so the king's pool is probably somewhere around there. There was not enough room for his horse to get through, so he went up the valley by night, examining the wall. So presumably he goes up here. Here's the Kidron Valley. He goes up there, examining the wall from the outside. And then having done that, he turns back and re-enters through the valley gate. So he turns back, all the way back round, and back in through the valley gate, okay? So presumably, while he was up here, he could see all of that bit. He's come down and he's inspecting the bit that he hadn't been able to see. He does a systematic route round, checking it out. Thank you, Lydia, for your amazing loan. I was a little disappointed you hadn't brought your pretty walking stick this morning. I should have communicated in advance. I know if I had asked, you would have obliged me. So, yes, appreciating the sentiment. So that's what he's doing. But the question I have in all of this is, why all the secrecy? Why all the secrecy? It's very clear. He says in verse 11 to 12, I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. He didn't tell anyone. He's there for 3 days, doesn't say a thing, and then he goes and conducts this inspection on his own without telling anyone. Now I get he obviously needed to see for himself what state the walls were in. Because I imagine, particularly those first 3 days as he was hanging out, he probably heard a lot of different opinions about the state of the walls, don't you think? I can imagine that he'd probably heard some people saying, oh yeah, the walls aren't too bad, you know, I mean, they're not great, but you know, it's not a big deal, they'll do. And then he probably heard some people saying, have you seen the state of the walls? It's dreadful. It's terrible, and I don't know how we're going to rebuild them. And then maybe if he'd actually told people what his plan was, if he'd arrived and said, hey, I'm interested in sorting out this issue with the walls, he probably would have had even more voices, do you think? Telling him, this is what you need to prioritize. See, actually, yeah, the walls are in disrepair, but this bit here is what you need to prioritize. Here's what you need to sort. Or, well, yeah, I get your idea, Nehemiah, but actually, it's just not a realistic project. It's not going to happen because... All of the different voices that would speak in to what he was wanting to do. And Nehemiah, if he's going to head up this project, if he's going to make it happen, he needs to know actually what really is the situation. He needs to see for himself, see what's going on, without being distracted by all of the other voices that would offer their opinions. Does that make sense? He needs to see firsthand and make an objective evaluation of the state of the walls. And you see, as I then try and relate that to us when we're facing challenges or things that are broken in the world and we're thinking, how do I fix it? Does that relate to us? That issue of lots of different voices offering their opinions, suggesting what we ought to be doing? Can we relate to that? Yeah? In fact, in considering this issue, I discovered a whole new word. Are you ready to expand your vocabulary? I love this word. Infobesity. Do you like it? Infobesity. Basically, this idea that in our world today, we are fed too much information. Yeah, so like obesity, infobesity. Too much information being thrown at us. You know this? Do you remember when you were young, back when I was young, and I needed to find something out, whether it was a school project or something I needed to research. And so I would go to this place called a library. Remember that? Yeah? And you would go to the right section on the shelf, and you would have a choice of 2 or 3 books on the topic. Sorry? Encyclopedia Britannica, there, that was your go-to. But you'd typically have a choice of maybe 2 or 3 books to choose between. If you were feeling really ambitious, you'd maybe take all 3 out. If like me, you're thinking, well, I don't want other people to miss out, so I'll just take one so there's something left for other people, because I'm that thoughtful, honest. And you just read that one book. But these days, you don't have to do that. You just whip out your phone, type the thing into Google, and you are presented with thousands of options, of articles, of news websites, of podcasts, of TikTok videos, of everything. And or the AI option. And that's a whole other issue, isn't it? And the problem is that when you've got too much coming at you, it actually has the opposite effect. You feel less knowledgeable. Can you relate to that? I suppose an equivalent for me, I sort of think several years ago now, this shows how exciting my life is, I decided I wanted to get myself some nice shampoo. Because you know how anyone else like you just order the same one on your Tesco click and collect every week just without thinking, yeah? But I thought, no, I want to treat myself to some nice shampoo. And I thought, a nice smell or something. And so you go to Tesco's, and the shampoo aisle is like this long. And there's all of these different shampoos. And you see, I was kind of thinking, basically, I just want, a nice smell. I want to choose by smell. But no. You are presented with, there's this one, makes your hair shiny. This one is for extra body. This one is for revitalizing hair. This one is for if you're wanting to brighten your hair. This one is for... And there's just like all of this stuff. And can I be honest with you? I looked at them all, panicked a little bit, and went home without buying any shampoo because I was overwhelmed by the choices. I didn't know where to start. And I think that's what it's a bit like these days. When there's something that's broken, when we hear of something in the world that's broken, and we want to try and understand how should we respond to this, and we're just overwhelmed with all of the different voices, with all of the different opinions and perspectives. And actually, the effect can be, rather than us being better informed, we just shut down. Because it's just like, I don't know. I don't know where to start. Case in point, even this concept of infobesity and information overload, I went onto Google to think, okay, it would be useful, rather than just me saying this, to back it up with some research or some statistics to prove I'm not just making this up. And so I Googled it to try and find some helpful research. And there were so many options that came up. I didn't know which ones to trust. Which of these can I reliably share with my church as, a good source of information? It was overwhelming. And so I haven't got any research to back this up for you because there was too much. It's overwhelming. And so what does Nehemiah do? He goes out at night when it's quiet, when there's nobody else around, and he sees firsthand the state of the wall with no other voices, just him and the wall. Now, we probably can't always do that, can we? There's a lot of things that we can't go and see firsthand for ourselves, what the situation is. Even if we could see firsthand, that doesn't mean that we'd know, therefore, what needs to be done. I could ask to see if I've got a problem, I've had an x-ray, I could ask to see my x-ray firsthand so that I don't have to listen to all of these voices about what I should do. But I don't know how to interpret an x-ray. I'm not skilled for that. So it might not be that we can always see things firsthand. It might not be that we have the expertise. But I think we can take something from Nehemiah in that actually sometimes just to shut out some of the noise, to go on a quiet walk at night time, or whatever the equivalent is with you, and just quiet it down. Bit of brain space, stop the overwhelm, and actually focus in on, okay, really, what's the issue here? Stop some of that noise. So Nehemiah goes and looks for himself. He's got first hand now, without any interference of other people. Here's what the problem is, and he's able to figure out, okay, so now, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to solve this problem? And like last week, we've got a nice bit of alliteration for you. It all starts with the first letter. He states the problem, he sets the goal, and he stirs up faith. He states the problem, sets the goal, and stirs up faith. See, if we look at what he says to them in verses 17 to 18, he starts off just very simply saying to the people, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Simple and factual. He's not offering opinions. He's not saying anything about who's to blame or who should have done what. He just states the problem. And that has to be the starting point for fixing something, doesn't it? We have to be real about this is what the problem is. Because, sometimes I think, I know for me, I tend to go one of two ways. I'll start off by trying to deny the problem. Oh, no, it's not really an issue. In denial, because I don't want to have to deal with it. But denying there's a problem, denying something is broken doesn't get it fixed, does it? But then we can swing the other way. Some of us, we perhaps recognize the problem. So we say, yeah, this is a problem. And then once we've stated the problem, our little brains start on a little spiral of, here's the problem, and I'm never going to fix it, and that means I'm a really bad person, and if I don't fix it, this is going to happen, and then it's going to be terrible, and I can't cope. And anyone else relate to that? Yeah? We go on a spiral downwards. We try and blame either ourselves or other people. If so-and-so had done this, and no, just state the problem. It's all we need. Just state the problem. Whether that's on an organizational level, in your workplace or your school or in the church, just state the problem. Or whether it's on a personal level, something in your home, financial situation, or a physical issue, or mental health or relationships, we state the problem. If we start spiraling, we get overwhelmed, and then we back off and don't do anything either. But if we deny the problem, if we don't state it, equally, it's not going to get fixed. So Nehemiah simply states the problem. And then he sets the goal. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. You see, it can be easy to state the problem and get stuck at that point. Oh, it's terrible. The walls are in ruin. They're in a state of disrepair. Oh, it's awful. That doesn't help. What's the goal? What are they aiming for? To rebuild the walls. And I think we can admire his approach. Does anyone remember being taught about SMART targets? Perhaps back in school, I had to look it up to remember what SMART stands for. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Apparently, if that's the sort of targets you set, then that means you're going to get them done. He hasn't done too badly, has he? He's fairly specific there. It's measurable, and we will no longer be in disgrace. That's how he's going to measure it. He sets the goal. But then, he stirs up faith. He says, I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. He tells them, look, God's already made the king of Persia let me come down here. He gave me these letters so that people are going to know we're allowed to do this. He's given us the resources for this project. Isn't that incredible? How many of you, when you're facing a challenging project, something that you know you've got to fix, need just a little bit of encouragement to get started? Yeah? Just a little bit. And this kind of encouragement is not... You know how sometimes people encourage you saying, oh, well, when I was in this situation, God did this. Or in the past, God has proven himself faithful by and that's great. But when people say that to me, it's like, well, yeah, that's lovely that he did that for them. But what about me? What about this situation now? And this is Nehemiah encouraging them with, here's what God's doing now in this situation. And so perhaps that's something we can do for each other. When we're tackling, fixing something that's broken, encouraging by saying, here's how God can move in this situation. Maybe that's by bringing a word. I feel like God's saying whatever, to encourage people that God is at work in the situation. Or maybe the encouragement is simply by saying, hey, I'm on board with you. I've got faith for this, and I'm going to start working on this. Let's do it together. That encouragement to get going. But just as we draw close to the end, let's come back to these chaps, Sanballat and Tobiah. And at the end, they've got another friend with them, Geshem, the Arab. These guys are not followers of God. They're not part of Israel. They are from the other people groups in the surrounding areas who are coming in and saying that they're not happy about it, and they mock them and they ridicule them. And what you find is throughout the story of this rebuilding the walls, these guys keep popping up, interfering, trying to mess things up. And I love the way that the writer of Nehemiah has actually structured this, that this wonderful bit about him inspecting the walls, and here we go, and here's what we're going to do, and the people saying, yeah, let's rise up and build. It's sandwiched in between these two bits. It starts with saying, Sanballat and Tobiah aren't happy about it. And it ends by saying, they mocked and ridiculed us. So the move forward is sandwiched in between opposition. Isn't that how it feels sometimes? When we're trying to move forward with God, when we're trying to do something, as we work in a world that is full of so many people who don't know God, that it can feel as we're taking steps forward, we find ourselves sandwiched between opposition. People who are doubting, people who are saying, come on, be sensible. You'll never manage that. You can't do that. That's not true. We can feel sandwiched in between. But I just love Nehemiah's response to them. He doesn't beat around the bush. I think we can conclude he's a fairly strong leader, Nehemiah. He doesn't sort of say, well, okay, I respect your opinion, but, he doesn't try and cajole them. He's really direct. He knows these people are not coming from a godly place. And he says, the God of heaven will give us success. Doesn't try and justify that. He just states it because it's truth. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. He sets a boundary. No, this is God's work. This is what God's doing. And you who oppose God, no, you're not allowed in. You will not be part of this. You will not interfere with this. You will not impact the work of God. It reminds me of the verse that actually I think we quoted it last week in the New Testament. I can't remember where it is now, but it's where Jesus says, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Done. End of. So, band, do you want to come back up and get ready to play? As we draw to a close, let's just take a few moments to think. What are our broken down walls? What are our broken walls? Maybe we're thinking personally in our lives, what are the walls that actually we know that they've been rubble for a while and we need to be real and see that? Or maybe we think as a church, or maybe in our world. Do we recognize that that concept of infobesity, that overload of voices, is making it too noisy for us to actually see what needs doing, to really see the situation? Do we need to take a little nighttime walk to quiet some of the noise and really see, okay, what's the actual deal here? Are we ready to simply state the problem without denying it and without spiraling into despair or catastrophizing? Are we ready to just state the problem and set the goals? Maybe there's boundaries that we need to set if we're moving forwards in God, and we need to say no. Are there Sanballats and Tobias in your life who you need to put a boundary with and say, no, I'm not listening to this voice. I'm listening to truth. Where do we need to rebuild? Let's invite God to be the voice that speaks to us, knowing that he is that safe place to recognize our brokenness. We had people saying about small groups and how it's the safe place to be real. God is a safe place to actually say, yeah, this is broken in my life, in my organization, in my place of work, in my church, wherever it is. It's a safe place to say, this is broken. And God, here's what I want to do. Here's my goal. And move forward with him. Let's be open to him as we worship him now.